Welcome to Slash Forward. If I use the word children too much, YouTube will turn off comments for this video. So let's ask, have you ever gotten frustrated with a smaller genetic variation of yourself? Maybe you yelled, or as a genetic variation of someone else got yelled at some point in your life. Maybe you felt guilty about it, wished you could take it back. In the film Mom and Dad, they posit a world in which this would be taken to the furthest extreme without hesitation nor remorse. What's causing this spontaneous, widespread savaging? Do Carly and Josh have what it takes to fend off a homicidal Nick Cage? Stick around to get down into the details after a quick run-through of the storyline for context. Let's get to it. We open briefly on a mommy with her child, but we see that she's a bad mommy of a sort. Then swoop into a suburban home where Carly is engaged in conversation with Damon, a young man she's taken on as her lover, as is a young woman's prerogative. He's going to be taking his PSATs, and as she begins to describe in sensual detail how she's going to congratulate him for his academic achievement, little bro Josh barges in to call her down for breakfast. In response, she fortuitously threatens murder and knocks the family portrait from its perch. Downstairs, as Sun Yi prepares breakfast for the family, they have a typical teenage argument about whether she's allowed to see Damon later. Her father Brent used to be a hellraiser, you see, and he understands the latent desires of men. Plus, the grandparents are coming for dinner and her Aunt Jeannie is about to pop out a baby. It's just too busy. On the way to school, Kendall tries to reconnect with her daughter on an emotional level, wondering where they drifted apart. She wants to work on reinforcing the familial bonds, but it's hard to rob someone you respect. They're just on different paths that have led them to not being besties anymore.
It's not my fault you have no life.
If only they could decode how this came to be. Back at home, Josh is still in his jammies and utterly failing to put up any meaningful defense against the tickle monster. Brent says farewell to Sun Yi and her daughter Lisa before taking a playful moment to assert dominance over the only other male in the household. He then heads off to work where the 8 a.m. commute seems strangely sparse this morning. Josh runs his charter copter through the home as Sun appears to be having a revelation of some sort. The garage door then gives him pause, flashing him backward to that time he found some crows picking at a nearly dead animal. He tried to save it by nursing it back to health in the back of Daddy's Firebird. However, the Fruit Loops did not provide an adequate nutritional profile, as leprechauns only eat Lucky Charms. This resulted in a decomposition that caused the interior of the bird to reek of death for weeks. He snapped back to attention by a sound we can only interpret as the tenderizing of young Lisa's face, which will be so good after marinating all day. We then check in on the cardio hip-hop class where the moms go to get their swerve on. Afterwards, she and Jenna, Riley's mom, get some coffee and pontificate on what the point of all of this is. This constant drive to keep it tight, other than for the pursuit of young men, for Jenna. Here, Jenna reveals a deep sense of jealous hatred that wells up inside her when she gazes upon her daughter's perky body, and Kendall could have sworn she took out some cash from the ATM. In homeroom, Carly and her BFF Riley are expertly identified by their wily teacher as having active phones, which are confiscated until the end of the day. They then get on with the lesson about planned obsolescence.
Products that are literally built to die.
Just like people. The lesson is interrupted by an unusually frequent sequence of calls for various students to come to the office as the police arrive outside. As Damon wraps up his PSATs, he has to pause to get a pencil and notices a gaggle of parents waiting patiently but hungrily outside the doors. When he finishes up, he's able to thread his way through them to his bike. At school, we discover that Carly needed her mom's money to buy a little baggie of Skittles, but before they can sort them by color, the fire alarm goes off. They join ranks and file out with the other kids, but things seem to be a little off-kilter outside. When they reach the edge of the campus, their parents are all there, summoning their babies to come to them. This creates hella confusion as the police are trying to keep them all separated. No one can hear anything. But then young Kevin breaks ranks because he's a mama's boy, and mama repays his loyalty by dispatching him with her keys, as she learned in self-defense class. The scent of first blood induces a frenzy and sends these boomers rolling their asses over the fence. The goal appears appears to be to catch up with their kids and avenge their stolen youth and vitality. The police do what they can, but old man's strength is real, and these are some thick boys. As they attempt to sneak away, Riley and Carly find this to be a very focused aggression. Damon has been spared this due to his father's absence from his daily life. After arriving home and cleaning up Papa's mess, he returns to find him awake and feeling ornery to a much more significant degree than is typical. Damon has a gentle soul and can't bring himself to harm his father. Luckily for him, his inebriated dad is able to make short work of himself. Kendall is pulled into a parking lot after replenishing her cash supply and thinks back to when she attempted to slide back into her old professional network. She was hoping to still have a position waiting for her after 15 years, but Tanner felt the industry had moved on since she's been gone and recommended she take up a hobby instead. The creeping existential dread is momentarily washed away, however, when she gets the call that her niece will be here soon. Meanwhile, the girls get back to Riley's house and turn on the news to see what's up. As Riley finds evidence of mommy margs, the report explains that mass filicide is spreading nationwide from an unknown cause. Since they need to know about the scientific underpinning of this phenomenon, they consult with Dr. Oz, naturally.
In fact, around 50% of the piglet fatality seen is due to the mother attacking or crushing the newborn pre-weaned babies.
You dumb bitch. Carly then hears strange gurglings from upstairs. She goes there, but too slow to help before Riley takes her last breath. At the hospital, Kendall sees what are, for her, the first reports of what's going on. But before she gets fully informed, Jeannie and her boyfriend Dan arrive with the labor well underway. Dan's not the biological dad, so Kendall manages the labor while Dan gets in there with his GoPro. Jeannie gives birth to a precious baby girl, but the monitor goes staticky, and she gets a little overeager in her effort to imprint, forcing them to dogpile her to separate them. Dan's in the corner puking his guts out while Kendall attempts to keep the baby protected. Back in the hood, Carly finds herself taking a tumble across the turf and staring down a very beefy aggressor. Damon catches up with her here and drives home the specific familial danger as they observe that Big Daddy is just taking a stroll down to the mailbox. Then they resolve to get home to Josh before her parents. Kendall is scared and confused, but compelled to hand over her niece for the safety of the baby. They're keeping all kids locked down until they can figure out what's going on. This is a necessary precaution, as at the nursery, the new daddies look on hungrily. Thinking now of the safety of her own children, Kendall frantically calls home and is reassured by Son that everything's fine. Josh is hiding around here somewhere and Brent is nowhere to be found. She then races in that direction, but Carly and Damon have already arrived. They go in slow to feel out the situation and are horrified that Son is wringing out mop water in the sink. Carly gives her the afternoon off and goes to find Josh. She finds him in an upstairs bedroom and convinces him to come out so they can slip away before their parents come home. But the bull moose arrives and gets his hackles up over the presence of a male rival. It's a tense situation in which they try to suss out whether he's homicidal or just Nicolas Cage, and it turns out that he's a little bit of both. He just doesn't trust modern dating in the era of abundant access to sexual information, making kids open to trying anything at all, like Dutch rudders and bumpkins and whatnot. This is interrupted by Josh, who unpins the grenade inside his papa's brain. Damon is able to distract Brent for long enough to allow them to steal away into the basement, where the kids stumble upon a flashback from 3 weeks prior. Desiring strongly to recapture some element of his youth, Brent ordered a pool table kit and went about meticulously crafting and adjusting it obsessively until it was just perfect. But no sooner does he finish than does Kendall confront him about it and question his financial acumen. To him, however, it's not about money, it's about having boundaries and opportunities to be alone with his thoughts. Nonetheless, he does see the impracticality of his desires and enthusiastically destroys his creation without a second thought. In the aftermath, he admits that he frequently laments his lost youth and its unfulfilled potential. This is not a foreign concept for Kendall. She also had this deeper intuition that everything she was doing was building up to something, family-wise, which is an expectation she also feels went unfulfilled. It's taken a lot to acknowledge that they've moved beyond the climax of these expectations in service of parenthood. With that, we then check back in with Kendall, who is listening as the radio person sends out a general warning to fight the urge to go to your children for their safety, as those instincts will betray you, and you will thirst for blood. Unfortunately, she's already within line of sight of the house. The instincts kick in and she joins the fray just as Brent is waking up. The situation is now much more dangerous, but is a net positive for their relationship now that they have a new goal and common interest. Kendall attempts to leverage her mommy empathy to lure their children to an early grave, but they still have some very reasonable concerns about Dad, who does become aggressively sad about not being able to use his hands to hug their throats. This requires a more sophisticated touch, and KK has a mind for engineering, so she starts by grabbing the sawzall and tries to get it to bite into the door. And tired of playing games, Brent goes to retrieve his handgun. He discovers it to be missing right as Josh puts 2 rounds through the door. Harsh, but necessary. It's also a huge disadvantage that this is the first Kendall is learning about having a gun in the house. Now, unless they institute a reversal of fortune, the kids are holding all the cards. The Wrens take a moment to administer first aid and discuss their differing opinions about the safety of having a gun in the house, while dressing a bullet wound, which pretty much punctuates the argument. The kids listen intently as the activity begins to pick up again. Under Kendall's instruction, they move the oven and disconnect the gas line. They then utilize a garden hose to pipe that sweet provider of heat and energy into the basement, which is sealed off from the outside. All the while, Damon demonstrates that a simple slap can seriously injure someone. Carly goes up to listen and try to figure out what they're up to, as they seal off the door and take any opportunity for stabbing. The adults then sit back and wait to reap the rewards of their hard work, in the form of hearing their children coughing and puking. Downstairs, the kids are finding the new atmosphere to be unamenable to their continued health and flourishing. Carly looks for an alternate way out and finds the air return to be quite roomy and comfortable. This inspires her to begin setting up a prank of epic proportions, rigging a row of matches to rub on a strike strip if the doors opened, and then dashing away into the ducts. And when the parents hear signs of distressed coughing, Brent begins the final cut-in, but the kids are already rolling around in the insulation by the time they get a proper porthole cut out. So when he attempts to bust in to give them the old daddy's home, they're safely tucked away upstairs while he's left to take a face full of combustion on his own. Kendall wakes up and goes to assess the damage from the concussive blast, which actually brought Damon back from unconsciousness. Looking to finish the job, Kendall chases Carly into an upstairs bedroom. When she eventually gains access, Carly's able to hold her off for long enough to allow Damon to interject. With great difficulty, they eventually get her contained inside the closet. They somewhat prematurely share a brief moment of levity, at which point Josh
Mom, stop it! You're gonna hurt them!
demonstrates that he still hasn't caught on to the situation. Damon, ever the soldier of love, gets fish hooked with a wire hanger, and then takes the tenderizer on behalf of his girl. Downstairs, both parents are now active and slowly walking their kids down, but are interrupted by the arrival of their dinner guests. Brent goes with the intention of greeting his parents and blowing them off, but they've come to feast, and Brent's whole ass is on the menu. Pop manages to stick him a few times with his service knife. As they try to sort out who is harming whom, Josh again provides a distraction that sets off Brent. They're just a little too fast for Grandpa, who's very eager to get in the mix. Kendall and Grandma then square off themselves. With only a single objective, all prior sentimentality goes out the window, as Brent destroys his beauty in his quest for blood. But catching up with Josh slows down the pace, allowing Pappy to reach the garage and start poking his hammies. Once it's man on man, Grandpa works to get his blade wet with Brent's heart juices. While inside, Kendall takes out her rival so she can focus on her other rival. She chases Carly to the front yard where Grandma catches back up with them. The struggle here is brief, as Brent ends 3/4 of the struggle in one smooth motion with his car, and then Damon wraps things up by finally doling out some head trauma of his own. Kendall and Brent then wake up bloodied and bound to a post. They act all sweet, but quickly betray their murderous intent, and we're left not knowing if or when the terror will ever pass. This one was definitely more of a conceptual movie. It was fairly simple and straightforward, and so there wasn't much left unexplained or explored. On this fine spring day, some sort of event was sweeping the nation wherein parents were overwhelmed by the impulse to kill their descendants. Age did not appear to be a factor, but that may have been just because things got a little sloppy at the end when it was time to ramp up the action. We'll get to that in a moment, but just to clarify, there was no definitive cause of the event stated within the movie. I call it an event because the viral aspect was only presented as one of several possible options, and I think there's evidence against this hypothesis. This was presented as a possible naturally occurring virus, as an unexplainable natural phenomenon based on the fact that there is precedent of this behavior in nature, and as some sort of biological weapon intended to wipe out humanity. It wasn't clear what triggered the timing. Seeing your children or home set you off, but why in the afternoon rather than the morning for some, but not others? others, parents lined up at school without seeing their kids. Also, instances of this trigger getting squeezed are accompanied throughout the film by screens going to static. This includes one of the monitors in the hospital, which is not picking up a broadcast, so it's clearly related and would indicate a cause that is unrelated to the naturalistic ideas presented before. It could be more like a Night of the Living Dead scenario where a passing meteor or some sort of other strange cosmic event sets off an unexpected worldwide phenomenon. Although how this behavior then manifests could refer back to some latent natural instinct. The fathers were champing at the bit to get at them babies. But how do they know which one belonged to them? It's a room of identically swaddled babies. Could be name tags, but I'm guessing that under the circumstances, many of the babies were unnamed. They would have been identified by RFID tags around their ankles, but for hospital purposes, this wouldn't help a bystander identify an individual baby. Since the primary point of contention in the film was interfamilial tension, these broader themes were mostly there to add some flavor. Figuring the whole thing out was not the point of the story. There were a couple of things I left out because they just didn't fit into the flow. This film felt like a shorter film that needed to reach its runtime. It's already only 82 minutes with credits, but then it included a plethora of flashback sequences. They added context to the family's relationships and the motivations behind some of their behavior, but weren't necessarily vital to accomplishing that, and were also spliced right into the middle of various action sequences. And perhaps a few more news reports that advanced our understanding of the threat would have been better, because we really are left not knowing how long this is going to continue. But back to the point, Lisa was tenderized, but then did mostly disappear from the movie. There's a callback to her presence when Kendall's going out to put the garden hose in the basement. The trash is full and swarming with flies, indicating her body was put in the bin. The handgun was kept in a lockbox under the bed, but Brent used Josh's birthday as a combination, which is why he was able to acquire it. There was a flashback that shows him playing with it at some prior point in time to confirm that he had already had the knowledge of how to get it. There were other flashbacks, like one of Kendall not getting mad at Carly when she got into mommy's makeup, demonstrating her tender and forgiving attitude in simpler times. But this was right in the middle of their fight, as if we needed this to understand the mother-daughter relationship. Also, right in the center of the circle of male violence, we saw that Brent had forgiven Josh for the carcass incident. He also tells him a story about how the Firebird was his dad's car. He totaled it when he was a teen and had to work hard to build it back from the ground up before taking ownership. Not sure this was meaningful other than in terms of adding a layer of symbolism. It was also a fairly unhinged performance. Brent in this instance was much more Nick Cage than in other areas of the movie, and the stories he shared about his exploits from his younger years were pretty wild to be telling a 7-year-old. I wanted to return to my previous comment about the sloppy ending, because I think the explanation of that unfolds into a series of questions about this film's plot points. To be clear, the directing was fine, and the action was tight and well executed. I'm referring specifically to how the rules of this threat play out. There is no known cause or intent behind whatever is happening here, but they do make it clear that it's parents against their most immediate descendants. Although, if this were related to some contravention of our natural instincts, or triggered in some unnatural way and related to a drive to avoid genetic obsolescence, it seems like it would not apply to anyone who was already past childbearing age. However, this was a fun twist at the end that added a new layer that may not have previously been on our minds, but it did muck things up a bit. For instance, it does drive home the parent-child relationship in that the grandparents were happy to see their grandchildren. It's also established many times throughout that this was a very distinct rage that was set off on sight of the children. I can see an outsider getting harmed in their attempt to prevent this from happening, but this doesn't explain why Grandma was so quick to go after Kendall. Additionally, Brent was acting pretty aggressive toward Damon right off the bat. There is a prior news report where they're interviewing a parent who says he knows that what he did was wrong, and he was sickened by what he was seeing unfold before him. In terms of other people's violence, when he was doing it, it just felt right. Despite the fact that he was aware he should be feeling remorse, he couldn't bring himself to find any sympathy or regret for what he had done. I don't think they played on this as well as they could have. For instance, Kendall was completely unfazed by what she saw in the trash can. This also complicates the family-adjacent violence. Another aspect I take issue with is the cheap way they try to keep Damon out of the action. Typically, when rendered unconscious, the amount of time spent in the shadow realm is indicative of the degree to which brain trauma was experienced. People are not usually out cold for more than a few minutes unless there is something seriously wrong. It felt a little lazy to have him laying here this entire time. But regardless, this was a fun and interesting concept for a movie, and it was expertly performed by some seasoned actors. It feels like an underrated movie, but I would consider it to be part of Nicolas Cage's recent horror-related movie renaissance. And some of those things that seem to be missing also translate into a crisp story that doesn't stop. It drops in and gives you the pieces you need here and there, plus a few extra that may be unnecessary to pad out the time a little, but then gets the job done in an exciting way with a logical progression. Because of that, I would recommend this to anyone looking for something quick and breezy. Sometimes when browsing a streaming platform, you find a few things that seem like they could be good, but maybe it's getting late and you don't want to commit to something that's 2 hours long, and you're unfamiliar with the offering, so you're taking a bit of a gamble with your choice. This would be a good one to settle on. It has some excitement and humor, it has good performances, it doesn't feel like a low-budget or amateurish movie. It puts the characters in real danger, but isn't so gory that it'll gross you out if that isn't your thing. This isn't just for hardcore fans of the genre or completionists. It's a movie for a wider audience, so you can devote your time to it without feeling like it was a total waste afterward. Now that we're here, I want to congratulate you for making it to the end of the video and affirm that you are a very special person because of it. And before we go, I'd like to give a huge thanks to my donors memorialized in the Hall of Headshots. I have a website set up where you can support the channel through donations or merch. Any donation unlocks a growing collection of uncensored movie recaps. And if you enjoyed the video, I would love for you to become a part of the channel by subscribing. Thanks for watching.